4 nights. That was how long Sarah Voss had been kneeling on the cold stone floor of the Lycan King's great hall, her bare hands wrapped around the throat of a wolf that was not supposed to be alive. The wolf had no name anymore. That was the first thing they had stripped from him. His name, his title, the silver chain that had once marked him as a lord of the northern reaches. What remained was approximately 240 pounds of shaking, half-shifted muscle pressed against the flagstones, hemorrhaging dark blood from a wound in his side that should have killed him 3 days ago. It had not killed him. Sarah was the reason it had not killed him. And every person standing in that great hall, the advisors, the warlords, the 3 ranking priestesses of the Moon Covenant, knew it, and not one of them had offered her so much as a blanket or a cup of water in return. She was 29 years old. She had spent 11 of those years training as a healer under the Covenant's most demanding master. She had closed wounds that other healers called impossible. She had sat with fever patients through entire turnings of the moon and coaxed their bodies back from the edge, with nothing but herb knowledge, bone intuition, and the kind of stubborn patience that her master had called her one virtue and her one curse simultaneously. She had never done anything like this. Holding a half-shifted lichen in place was not healing. It was something older and stranger, something that lived in the space between her palms and his pulse, something the Covenant had no name for and would not have approved of if it did. The wolf's body kept trying to complete the shift, ribs expanding, jaw distending, spine curling toward the full change, and every time it did, Sarah pressed her hands harder against the sides of his neck and breathed the change back down through sheer will. She could feel his heartbeat in her teeth. She could feel the fever moving through him in slow, grinding waves. And through all of it, through all 4 nights, the Lycan King had said nothing. He sat at the far end of the hall on a chair that was not quite a throne. Too spare, too practical. The kind of seat a man chose when he wanted people to know he had no patience for ceremony, and he watched. He had not slept. Sarah had begun to doubt that he could. His eyes were a particular shade of amber that she had only seen in one other place. The moment just before dawn broke over the northern sea, that thin, impossible color between night and light. And they had not left her since the first hour of the first night, when they had dragged the dying wolf in and the head priestess had pointed at Sarah and said, "Her. She is the one who will hold him, not she will try, not she may be able to, her." As though there were no question. As though the choice had been made somewhere above Sarah's understanding, in a register she was not permitted to access. She had not agreed, she had also not refused. She was beginning to understand that those were not the same thing. The wolf shuddered beneath her hands. His temperature had dropped 2 degrees in the last hour, which was either a promising sign or the precursor to something catastrophically worse. And Sarah could not tell which, because she had no instruments, no reference texts, nothing but her own nervous system, pressed against his and the increasingly unsettling conviction that she was the only thing standing between this creature and whatever waited for him on the other side of a death that should have already happened. "He is stabilizing," she said, to no one in particular. Her voice had gone rough somewhere in the second night, scraped down to something lower and more careful than her usual register. "His core temperature is dropping. That is either good or it is not. I cannot tell you which without knowing more about the nature of the wound." Silence from the hall. Then, from the far end of it, a sound she had not heard in 4 nights. The Lycan King's chair moved. She did not look up. She had learned not to, not because she was afraid of him. She had stopped being afraid of him sometime in the middle of the second night, when fear had given way to the more immediate problem of keeping the wolf breathing. But because looking up meant taking her attention off the pulse beneath her hands, and the pulse was the only language she had right now that meant anything. She heard his footsteps on the flagstones, long stride, even pressure. A man who had learned to move in a way that cost nothing, that revealed nothing. He stopped 3 feet away. She still did not look up. "The wound is cursed," he said. His voice was low and particular, the kind of voice that had learned to carry across distances without raising itself. It landed in her sternum like a stone dropped in still water. "I know," she said. Another silence. "Then you knew and you put your hands on it anyway?" "Yes. Why?" Not a question, quite. More an opening in a conversation she hadn't agreed to have. Sarah pressed her thumbs gently into the pulse points below the wolf's jaw and felt his heartbeat stutter, then steady. "Because someone had to," she said. "And I was the one who was pointed at." She heard something in his breathing change, not much. "Just enough. Look at me," he said. She did. The Lycan King was not what she had expected the first time she had seen him. 3 months ago, when the Covenant had sent her north with a sealed letter and instructions she was not permitted to read, She had expected the thing the stories described. Enormous, imperious, the kind of power that needed ceremony and distance to contain itself. What she had found instead was a man who was exactly as large as the stories said, and who used none of it performatively. He was tall in the way that structures were tall, load-bearing and without vanity. His face was the kind of face that had been weathered into something that had more to do with time than with beauty. Sharp at the jaw, careful around the eyes, the whole of it currently arranged in an expression that she would not have called readable. But his eyes, this close, were doing something that the rest of his face was not. "He will live," the king said. It was not a question. "I believe so," Sarah said. "But I need to know what the curse is. I have been working against it without knowing its nature, and that is the most dangerous kind of ignorance." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched something move through those amber eyes. Not reluctance, exactly. More like the calculation of a man who had learned to give information in exact, measured quantities, and was reassessing the measure. "It is a severance curse," he said finally, "cast by the High Elder of the Eastern Reaches 12 days ago, at the conclusion of a binding ceremony that my Lord Davin interrupted before its completion." Sarah looked down at the wolf. Davin, she now had a name, and recalibrated everything she thought she understood about what she was holding. A severance curse was not a wound curse. It was not trying to kill the body. It was trying to separate the soul from it, slowly, the way a knife drawn very carefully through a cord did not cut so much as part. And Davin had been sitting in it for 12 days, which meant he had been surviving the slow unmooring of himself from himself for nearly 2 weeks, before anyone had put Sarah's hands on him. "You should have told me this 4 days ago," she said. "I did not know you 4 days ago," the king said. She looked up at him again. The light in the hall was thin and gray. Morning was beginning somewhere outside the high windows. And it did him no favors in the sense that it revealed everything. The exhaustion he was not performing, the way his jaw was set against something she could not name. "You know me now?" she asked. Something shifted in his face, not softened precisely, resettled. "I have watched you hold a dying man against a curse for 4 nights with no sleep, no food, and nothing to work with but your own body," he said. "That tells me more than most people reveal in a year." Sarah should have felt something defensive about that. She did not. She felt instead the particular clarity of a statement being recognized as true. She had not known it about herself before 4 nights ago. She knew it now. "Then tell me the rest of it," she said. "Tell me who cast it and why, and whether there is a counter-ritual, or whether I have been buying him time that has no possible good end." He sat down on the floor. She blinked. It was possibly the last thing she had expected him to do. The Lycan King, who had not moved from his chair in 4 nights, folded himself down onto the cold flagstones of his great hall, 3 feet from her and a dying lord, and sat there with the pragmatic ease of a man who had long since stopped caring what it looked like to make himself level with the situation in front of him. "The High Elder's name is Carvin," he said. "He is 340 years old, and has been casting severance work since before this hall was built. The binding ceremony Davin interrupted was meant to tie my successor's right to the northern reaches to a lineage that Carvin controls. Davin knew this. He intervened because he owed me a debt that went back 20 years, to a night on the northern ice when I pulled him out of a fissure, and he decided that was worth his loyalty even when his loyalty became inconvenient." He paused. "The curse has a counter-ritual, but the counter-ritual requires something that the covenant has, something they have not offered to provide." She felt the shape of it before he finished the sentence. "Because the covenant sent me here with a sealed letter, and the head priestess pointed at me specifically on the first night." "Yes, and whatever is in the sealed letter, I have not read it," he said. "It was addressed to me and I have not opened it, because I have been more occupied with not losing my lord to a curse than with reading correspondence." Sarah stared at him. For 4 days, she almost laughed. She did not, because the wolf beneath her hands had begun to shiver again, and she pressed her palms down against the warm sides of his neck and breathed the fever chill back. But the almost law remained in her chest, a small, strange warmth she had not expected to find here. "The letter is in my satchel," she said. "The outer hall. Blue bag, eastern side shelf." He rose in one clean movement and was gone before she had finished the sentence. She turned her attention back to Davin. Up close, without the king in her peripheral vision for the first time in 4 days, she could see what the curse was doing to his face. It was very subtle, a kind of transparency at the edges, as though some essential quality of him was becoming slightly less committed to remaining in the physical. His eyelashes, the angle of his cheekbones, the places where a man's body stored the small, incidental details of identity. They were there. but less emphatically. You have a debt to call in, she told him quietly. Stay. The wolf's ear twitched. The king came back. He sat down again, closer this time, 2 feet, not 3, and he had the letter in his hands, the covenant's crimson seal already broken, which told her he had opened it in the outer hall, rather than bring it back closed, which told her he had not wanted her to see his face when he read it. She filed that information away and waited. The counter-ritual requires a tethering, he said. His voice had changed, not dramatically, but the careful measurement of it had shifted slightly, as though some calculation had resolved, and the result was not what he had calculated for. A living tether, with enough life force to anchor the severance point back to the body. The tether must remain in contact with the cursed body, until the curse either accepts the anchor or burns out against it. That is what I have been doing, Sarah said slowly. For 4 nights. Yes, without being told. Without being told. She looked at her hands on Davin's neck. She looked at the slight transparency at his temple. She looked at the way the curse had been burning itself against her palms for 4 days, and she had not known that was what it was. She had thought it was the pain of holding a difficult position for too long, the deep ache of muscle and bone under sustained pressure, the kind of thing healers learned to ignore as professional cost. The priestess knew, Sarah said. The letter instructs me that the tether must be a living healer of sufficient power, assigned to the task willingly. A beat of silence. It does not note whether the healer was told what the task was before she was assigned to it. The warmth in Sarah's chest curdled. It went cold and specific, the way a bruise went cold when the body finally registered the impact. She had been brought here, under instructions. She could not read. She had been pointed at in a hall full of people who knew what was being asked of her. She had been kneeling on this floor for 4 nights, burning herself against an elder's curse. And not one person in this hall had told her what was happening in language she was permitted to understand. Willingly. The letter said willingly. She looked up at the king. He was watching her with those amber eyes, and that unreadable face, and the specific, separate quality of a man who was not trying to manage what she felt about this. Did you know? No, he said. Not specifically. I knew the covenant had sent someone, and that the head priestess believed she was sufficient. I did not know the mechanism. He paused. I have been watching you for 4 nights because you were doing something I could not explain, and I did not want to interrupt something I could not explain. That is a very careful answer, she said. It is a true one. She breathed in through her nose. The great hall smelled of stone and cold, and something underneath it. Wood smoke from the outer corridors. And beneath that something green and mineral that she had decided, by the end of the 2nd night, was simply this place smelled like. What the king's territory smelled like. A particular quality of the northern earth that had nothing to do with anyone in it, and was the only neutral thing in the room. She had been used, not brutally, not cruelly, but deliberately, with full knowledge, by the head priestess who had trained her and pointed at her, and given her no language for what she was walking into. And around her, in this hall, advisors and warlords had watched for 4 days, and said nothing, because they were watching a necessary ritual, and the healer performing it did not need to know its name. They watched, Sarah thought, and not one voice named what was happening. The curse, she said, keeping her voice even. If I remove my hands now, what happens? He begins to separate in earnest, the king said. The anchoring you have established degrades. He would likely complete the separation within 6 hours. A beat. He would not survive it. 6 hours. Davin had 20 years of loyalty in his bones, and 6 hours between him and an elder's curse that wanted to unmoor him from the world. And the only thing standing between him, and that was Sarah's hands, and the information she had just been given 4 nights too late. She pressed her palms down more firmly. She felt the curse push back. It always pushed back, a pressure like standing in moving water, constant and patient and utterly indifferent to her exhaustion. How long, she said. The counter-ritual needs to run until the curse exhausts itself against the anchor, the king said. Given what you have already built, based on what the letter describes, which I am extrapolating from, perhaps another 2 nights. 6 more nights total. 2 more from now. She had slept perhaps 11 hours in 4 days in fragments, against Devon's shoulder when he was quiet enough to allow it, waking every time the curse surged, and his body tried to finish the change that would destroy him. All right, she said. He looked at her for a moment. That is all? What else is there? She said. He is dying. I am the one who can stop it. The ethics of how I came to be in this situation are real, and I will attend to them when Davin is not in danger of ceasing to exist. Something moved across his face. It was not quite what she would have called admiration. It was more particular than that, more specific to this man in this moment. as though she had confirmed something he had not been certain of until now. "Is there anything you need?" he said. "Food," she said, "and something to sit on. My knees have been on stone for 4 nights, and I am not going to apologize for that being a problem." He rose. He moved through the hall, and the advisors and the warlords who had watched for 4 nights moved to accommodate him. And within 20 minutes there was a low, cushioned bench positioned behind Sarah, close enough that she could lean back against it while keeping her hands on Davin. And there was warm food. Real food, broth and bread, and something with dried fruit that she ate with one hand while the other stayed on the wolf's pulse. The king sat back down on the floor beside her. He did not explain this choice. He simply sat there, and Sarah found after a while that she did not want to ask him to explain it, because his presence beside her had taken on the quality of a specific weight, not pressure, not demand, but the kind of weight that made the floor feel more real under her knees. She ate, she breathed, she held the line against the curse. He said, "Tell me your name," she told him. He said it back to her once, quietly, the way a person repeated a name when they wanted it to mean something beyond identification. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Davin's face, on the slight transparency at the temple, monitoring. But she felt the warmth in her chest shift and change, becoming something with more volume to it than before. "Sarah Voss," he said again. "Healer of the Covenant." "Reluctant healer of the Covenant," she said. "There is a difference?" "There is always a difference," she said, "between what an institution does with you and what you are." He was quiet for a moment. "Then yes, there is." She did not know his name. She knew his title, his territory, his function in the hierarchy of the northern reaches. But no one had said his name to her in 4 days, and she found suddenly that she could not know it. "And you," she said. "Calder," he said, plain, direct, no title attached. The morning light crept further through the high windows. Davin shivered, and Sarah pressed down, and the curse pushed back, and she pushed harder. The great hall settled around them into the specific quiet of a place where everyone was awake, but no one was performing wakefulness. The 5th night came in the way the North's nights came in spring. Fast and without apology, the light simply stepping back all at once as though it had made a decision. Sarah had learned to read the light through the hall's upper windows, and to mark the hours by its quality. By the time the gray turned to dark, she had established a rhythm of 3 slow breaths in and 2 out that seemed to coincide with Davin's improved moments, the brief windows when his temperature steadied and the transparency at his temples receded, and she had been doing this long enough now that her body had made its peace with the task in a way that was separate from her mind's complicated feelings about how she had come to it. Calder had not left. He had moved twice, once to speak quietly with the warlords at the hall's edge, and once to the outer corridor for what had appeared, based on the smell that came back with him, to be a brief and functional meal. But he had come back both times and settled himself back onto the floor beside her, with the same pragmatic absence of ceremony. "The High Elder Carvin," Sarah said on the 5th night, when the hall was quiet enough that her voice would carry only to him. "Has he been told that the counter-ritual was initiated?" "He has been told that Davin survived past the 3rd day," Calder said, "which he would not have predicted." "What did he say?" "Nothing worth repeating." She smiled slightly, though there was nothing warm in it. "He did not expect me to hold. He did not expect anyone to hold. A severance curse at that magnitude is intended to be self-completing. The Elder's theory was that the body would separate within 72 hours, regardless of intervention, because no living tether would have sufficient force to anchor against his work." Calder paused. "He has not revised this theory yet." "Let him not revise it," Sarah said. "Not until Davin is clear." Calder looked at her sidelong. "That is a strategist's thinking for a healer." "Healers are strategists," she said. "We just fight with different materials." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the distance, wind moved against the hall's high walls. Not a storm, just the casual, enormous pressure of northern air asserting itself against structures that had been built to receive it. "I want to tell you something," Calder said. Sarah waited. "When they brought him in on the 1st night," Calder said, "and the head priestess pointed to you, I watched your face. You were the only person in this hall who did not already know what was being asked." She felt the bruise go cold again. "I know. I should have intervened then," he said. "I did not, because I did not fully understand the mechanism, and I trusted that the Covenant's representative had communicated what was necessary. A beat. She had not. I do not believe the omission was accidental." Sarah turned this over. The head priestess's name was Myron, and Myron had trained her for 11 years and pointed at her, in a hall full of strangers, without a word of preparation. The sealed letter had said willingly. The letter had been addressed to the king, not to Sarah. The choice had been represented as hers and had never, functionally, been hers. Why not tell me on the first night? Sarah asked. She meant it as a genuine question, not an accusation. Because I could see that you were already working, he said. And I did not know what interrupting you would do to him. I made a wrong calculation. I held the information to protect him, and in doing so I withheld it from you, and that was wrong. He said it plainly. No performance of guilt, no reaching for her forgiveness in the immediate wake of it. Just the fact stated clearly. She looked at him. He met her eyes. I accept that, she said. I do not accept what Myron did. No, you should not. I will not. I know. They sat in that for a moment. The thing Myron had done, and Calder's part in it, and the specific distinction between the two, which Sarah was holding carefully because collapsing them together would be easier and also wrong. Myron had known. Myron had chosen the omission deliberately, had constructed a situation in which Sarah's healer instincts would carry her into compliance without requiring consent, had used 11 years of trust and training to point her at a task and trust that she would not refuse. She had not refused, not because she had consented. She was clear-eyed about that now, but because there had been a dying man and she was a healer, and those two facts together were stronger than any instruction she had been given. Myron had known that too. Sarah pressed her thumbs against Davin's pulse and felt it steady, strong, the best it had been in 5 days. The transparency at his temples was minimal tonight. His breathing had deepened into something closer to genuine sleep than the shallow survival breathing of the first 3 nights. Tell me about the binding ceremony, she said. The one Davin interrupted. Calder was quiet for a moment. Not reluctant, she thought, rather assembling. The eastern reaches have been governed by Carvin's bloodline for 400 years, he said. Not as law but as influence, the kind that sits underneath law and shapes it. When my predecessor named the northern reaches as territory requiring consolidated governance, Carvin moved to attach conditions to the succession. The binding ceremony was designed to tie my named successor's right to govern to a marriage alliance with Carvin's lineage. Specifically, he paused, to a marriage with Carvin's granddaughter. And your successor, Sarah said carefully, has not been named yet, Calder said. The ceremony was premature. It was an attempt to create the conditions of a debt before the terms were set. Another pause. Devon recognized this. He is old enough to have seen Carvin work before. And so he interrupted it. And Carvin cursed him on the spot, in front of 40 witnesses with no hesitation, which tells you everything you need to know about how much Carvin cared about the political cost of doing so. Sarah thought about a man 340 years old who could cast a severance curse in front of 40 witnesses without hesitating about the cost. A man who had been sitting inside institutional power for so long that consequences had become theoretical. The Covenant knows Carvin, she said. It was not a question. Deeply, Calder said. The Covenant has maintained neutrality in the Reach's politics for 200 years. Their neutrality is worth more to both sides than alliance would be. And yet Myron sent me here and wrote you a letter about a tethering ritual, Sarah said. That is not neutrality, no, Calder said. It is not. She could feel the shape of it now, the full shape, the way a knot became comprehensible when you held the cord at both ends. Myron had not violated neutrality by sending a healer. Myron had violated it, and violated Sarah specifically, by sending a healer as a ritual instrument without telling the instrument what it was. The Covenant had chosen a side, chosen Calder's side, and had done so in a way that gave them complete deniability. Sarah had come willingly. Sarah had stayed willingly. Sarah had initiated the tethering by her own instinct in her own hands. If anyone asked, the Covenant's neutrality was intact, and Sarah was the vehicle of it. She said nothing for a long while. Calder did not fill the silence. The wind pressed against the walls. Davin breathed. The curse pressed against her palms in its slow, patient, water-current way, and she pressed back. And there was a long period in the 5th night where she lost track of the conversations she had been having and the information she had been given, and was simply present in the physical fact of holding the line. The warmth of her palms, the cold of the floor, the distant wood smoke, the green mineral smell of the Northern Territory, the steady amber weight of a man sitting 2 feet away who had told her the truth when he had it and not before. Calder, she said eventually, yes, when this is over. When Davin is stable and the curse is exhausted. She kept her eyes on Davin's face. What happens to me? He was quiet for long enough that she felt it, the weight of the question finding its level in him. What do you want to happen? He said. I want to go back to the Covenant, she said. And I want to speak to Myron, and I want her to look me in the face while I tell her exactly what she did, and that I will not serve under her administration again. And then I want to decide what I do next without the covenant's sealed letters, or their instructions, or their pointed fingers. Another silence. Then, that is a fair and complete answer. And your answer? She said. What happens to you when this is over? I manage the political consequence of an elder who cast a public curse without caring about the cost, he said. I find a way to protect Davin from a follow-up action, because Carvin will not let this stand. He will not accept that his curse failed, and he will look for the mechanism, and when he finds it, he will come for the mechanism. She felt the weight of that settle into her chest. The mechanism being me, yes. She had known this in some structural way since the moment Calder had explained the counter-ritual. She had just not said it aloud yet. How long before he knows? He may already know that the curse has been anchored, Calder said. He will not know specifically what kind of anchor or who provided it for some time. Carvin is thorough, but he is also old, and old power sometimes calculates slowly. He paused. But eventually, yes, he will find out. And then? And then you will need to not be findable by someone with 340 years of practice at finding things, Calder said. Or you will need to be somewhere that he cannot reach. The second option had a shape that she could see and that she was not going to name yet. Not tonight. Not on the fifth night with Davin's pulse under her thumbs, and the curse still actively pressing, and her own emotions still too new and too unsorted to attach to anything larger. Tell me something that has nothing to do with Carvin, she said. The quality of his attention changed, a small specific shift that she felt rather than saw. What do you want to know? Anything. Tell me about the northern ice. You said you pulled Davin out of a fissure 20 years ago. Tell me about that. So he did. He told her about the ice in the way that people with genuine, complicated relationships to places talked about them. Not with wonder. Exactly. But with the kind of specific love that came from something having been very difficult for a long time and then becoming familiar. The ice had sound, he said. People who had not been on it did not know that. It spoke to itself constantly in low, grinding frequencies that were felt more in the chest than the ears. And once you knew the language of it, you could tell from the sound, alone, what the ice was doing, whether it was stable or moving, whether a fissure was opening or closing. He had heard the fissure before he had seen Davin fall in. He had been 200 meters away and running before the sound confirmed itself. Davin had gone in, he said, not from carelessness but from a specific kind of exhaustion that Calder described with evident precision. The exhaustion of a man who had been working for too many hours in conditions that did not forgive inattention, and who had allowed himself a moment of inattention at exactly the wrong location. It was not stupidity, Calder said, it was human. He had gone in sideways, which was the better way to go in. It meant he had enough awareness left to angle his body before the ice took him, and Calder had reached the edge and gone in after him because the alternative was unacceptable and there was nobody else, and the calculation took no time at all. That is when you decided he was worth the debt, Sarah said. That is when I decided debt was the wrong frame for it, Calder said. He had not fallen in trying to serve me. He had fallen in being a person. Pulling him out was not a transaction. She turned this over, the curse pushed against her palms. She pushed back, automatically, without having to think about it now. It had become as reflexive as breathing, this particular opposition. Her body had mapped the pressure of it and responded before her mind caught up. You have been king a long time, she said. 19 years. And in 19 years of people framing things as debt, what you owe them, what they owe you, you still distinguish between the transaction and the persons. I try to, he said. I do not always succeed. She thought about this. She thought about Myron, who had failed the same distinction so thoroughly that she had treated a person who had trained under her for 11 years, as a mechanism, as a tool with enough life force to anchor a curse. The letter had said willingly, and Myron had engineered willingness by removing every condition under which refusal was possible. There was a word for that, several words. None of them were neutral. On the 6th night, Davin spoke for the first time. It was not much. His eyes did not open. His body remained still, temperature steady. The near-normal breathing of the last 12 hours continuing undisturbed. But his lips moved, and the sound that came out was a name. Not Calder's name, not Sarah's, but a woman's name, said with the particular inflection of someone who has been carrying a thing for so long that it comes out in the unguarded moment before full consciousness. Sarah filed this away as significant, something to ask about later. She had changed her position, by the 6th night, to sitting cross-legged with Davin's head in her lap, both hands on his temples, which was more sustainable than kneeling, and allowed her to lean against the bench that had been placed behind her. The king had moved accordingly, shifting his position, so that he was at her side, rather than in front of her, close enough that his shoulder was a foot from hers when they were both sitting. They had been talking for 2 days, in the quiet hours of the night between the urgent hours and the sleeping hours. Talking with the specific quality that came from two people who had been forced into close proximity under unusual conditions and had discovered, somewhat against the expectations of both, that the other was worth the investment of real attention. She had told him about her mother, who had been a herb gatherer in the coastal settlements and who had sent Sarah to the Covenant at age 18 because she had seen something in her daughter's hands, not just the skill, but the quality of the attention that came with it, and had known it was more than she could teach. She had told him about Master Helwyn, who had trained her for 3 years before dying of a fever. He refused to let her treat because he believed healers should not intervene in the body's own processes, and that included his own. She had told him about the years between, the cases that had worked and the cases that had not, the specific grief of a healer who knew exactly why a patient died and could not unknow it. He had told her about the 19 years, about the weight of governance in a territory where the history was long and the memories were longer, about the eastern reaches and Carvin not as a political problem but as a particular kind of tiredness. The tiredness of managing someone who had lived so far inside power that they had stopped distinguishing between what they were owed and what they desired. About the ice, more of it, winter by winter, the way he had learned to read its moods, the way he had learned to read everything in his territory. Not for beauty, though the beauty was there, but for information, for what it told him about what was coming. She noticed that he did not talk about people in the abstract. When he described a thing, there was always a specific person in it, a named quality, a moment with a particular texture. She found this interesting in ways she was not fully articulating, even to herself. On the 7th night, 2 hours before dawn, the curse broke. Sarah felt it before she understood it, a sudden absence of pressure, like a current reversing, and then a wave of heat through her palms that was not fever but its opposite, as though the curse had been consuming something in Davin that was now flooding back in. Davin's body arched once and then settled. His temperature spiked and dropped in the space of 40 seconds. The transparency at his temples disappeared entirely, so completely that she could see the fine lines of his face as specific and particular as they would have been if she had met him in a corridor on a normal day and not held him through a dying. She kept her hands on his temples for another full minute. She counted the seconds. Then she removed them slowly, watching his face, monitoring. His color was normal. His breathing was deep and even. His pulse, when she pressed 2 fingers briefly to his throat, was steady and strong. "He is clear," she said. Calder rose from the floor in one motion and was beside her before she had finished the sentence. He checked the same things she had checked, without asking her to guide him. Pulse, temperature, the color at the throat and jaw, and she watched him do this and understood that he had done it before, many times, that the quick clinical assessment was not borrowed from her but was his own. "Yes," he said. He put his hand on Davin's forehead for a moment, not checking, something else. And then he straightened up and looked at Sarah. She had been expecting to feel relief. She did feel it. But it was layered over with the exhaustion of 7 nights and the complicated residue of everything she had learned in them. And underneath all of that, there was something else that she did not have a name for yet. Something that had been building in the quiet hours of the talking nights and had not resolved into anything simple. "You should sleep," he said. "I should," she agreed. She tried to stand and discovered that her legs had been waiting for permission to stop working. She got as far as one knee and Calder's hand was there, not pulling, just present under her arm. A stable point, something to push against. She stood. They were very close. She had not catalogued the fact of his height before, not precisely, only as a general quality of his presence. Close to him now, she was aware of the specifics, the breadth of his shoulders, the angle at which she had to look up to find his face, the way he was arranged around her without pressing, giving her the room to stand on her own, but being close enough that it was clear the room was a deliberate choice. "You held him," Calder said. "I did. 7 nights, yes." His eyes were doing the thing they did, the amber morning sea quality of them, making no effort at all to be less than they were. She was too tired to be anything other than honest about the fact that she felt seen by them. She had been seen by them for 7 nights. She found no longer interested in pretending otherwise. "I am going to go to the Covenant," she said, "as soon as Davin is stable enough to be left. I am going to speak to Myron. And after that, he said. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I know what I'm walking away from. I don't yet know what I'm walking toward." He was quiet for a moment. His hand had remained under her arm through the conversation, and she had not moved away from it. And that was information she was collecting about herself. There is no debt, he said. What you did, it was not a transaction. She looked up at him. I know, she said. You would not have let it be. Something in his face shifted entirely then. Not the careful resettling she had seen before, but something deeper than that. Something that had the quality of a man recognizing an exact thing and choosing not to minimize it. There is a position in the northern reaches, he said, for a healer of sufficient capability. One who does not report to the Covenant and is not subject to sealed letters or instructions she cannot read. She tilted her head. That is a very careful way of offering something. I am trying not to offer it before you've had a chance to refuse what you need to refuse first, he said. This was the right thing to say. She knew it was the right thing to say because it did not ask her to collapse the sequence, to skip from the violation to the resolution without attending to the middle part, without going back to stand in front of Myron and say the true words clearly and loudly, and without any softening for the comfort of the institution that had trained her. She needed to do that first. She knew she needed to do that first. And he had not asked her not to. All right, she said. She moved to the bench and sat down, properly sat, for the first time in 7 nights, and looked at Davin's sleeping face and the early gray light beginning in the high windows, and felt the full weight of what the last 7 nights had cost, and deposited in her at the same time. Calderet's beside her, not on the floor this time, on the bench, leaving the kind of space between them that was not absence but rather room. Her name, Sarah said after a while. Davins, the one he said in his sleep. Fen, Calder said. A woman he has been in love with for 3 years and has not told. Why not? Because she is from a family that Carvin controls. And he did not want to put her in the position of choosing. Sarah thought about this. About a man who had spent 20 years loyal enough to go to the ice, and loyal enough to interrupt a binding ceremony, and loyal enough to take a severance curse without flinching, and who could not find a way to say a name aloud to the person it belonged to. When he wakes up, she said, someone should tell him to stop making her choices for her. Yes, Calder said. Someone should. He was looking at her when he said it. Not with the management of a king managing a complicated situation, but with the clean attention of a man who had made a choice, and was being honest about having made it. She held that for a moment, 7 nights of it. The cold floor and the curse, and the specific quality of his presence beside her, and the conversations in the dark that had been real conversations. Not performances, not management, not the transactions of 2 people calculating their respective interests. The way he had sat on the floor beside her and said, I made a wrong calculation, and not asked for anything in return. The way he had said her name back to her, once quietly, like it was worth saying carefully. I am going to need time, she said. Yes, he said. Not a small amount of it. No. And after I speak to Myron, she will tell the Covenant. There will be implications for the neutrality question. For Carvin, I know. Those are my problems to solve. Not entirely, Sarah said. I am the mechanism as we established. I have some claim on how the mechanism is managed. He looked at her. That is not how I would describe you. I know. It is how Carvin will describe me, though. And knowing that is useful. A pause. Then, you are already thinking about it. I am always thinking about it, she said. I am a strategist. You noted that. Something that was not quite a smile moved through his face, more a quality of warmth than a visible expression, contained and specific, the kind of warmth that a person showed when they were not performing it for anyone. She felt the exhaustion fully, finally, the long and honest weight of 7 nights on her bones. She leaned back against the bench and closed her eyes and let it settle over her. And the last thing she was aware of before sleep took her was the warmth to her left, steady and present, not closing in but close. Exactly close enough, and no further. 3 days later, Devon sat up. He was disoriented for the first 30 seconds, in the specific way of people who have returned from a long distance and need a moment to inventory what they still have. Then his eyes found Sarah, and then they found Calder, and then he said, in a voice that was rough from disuse but entirely himself, Someone want to tell me how long I was gone. 9 days, Sarah said. Davin closed his eyes briefly. Carvin, yes, Calder said. Did it work? The curse? Sarah said. No, it did not. Davin opened his eyes and looked at her with the particular expression of a man who was assembling the scope of an event he had not been present for. You, he said. Me, she agreed. He looked at his king for a moment, and then back at Sarah, and some private mail communication passed between them that Sarah neither sought nor required, because its conclusions were not hers to manage. I owe you something, Davin said. You owe me nothing, she said. You were pointed at a dying situation, and I was pointed at you. We were both instruments of other people's intentions. She paused. But if you want to do something useful, there is a woman named Fen, who has been waiting 3 years for you to stop deciding her choices on her behalf. His face changed entirely. Not the transparency of the curse. Something else, something much older and more specific, a man caught in the exact location where he keeps his real vulnerability. How do you know about? You said her name, Sarah said, on the 6th night. I was listening. He was quiet for a long time then. Yes. All right. She left him with Calder in his recovery and went to prepare for the journey south. She took 3 days to rest properly and plan, because she was a strategist, and she was not going to walk into Myron's hall without the full clarity of everything she knew and everything she intended to say. She wrote 2 letters. One she sent ahead to the Covenant, formal and precise, requesting a formal audience. One she kept, addressed to herself, with the full account of the 7 nights, as she understood them at the time, and as she understood them now. The 2 accounts were different in instructive ways. She read them both several times. Calder did not try to dissuade her from going. He provided her with a horse and a guide and a written account of the sealed letter's contents, which she had a right to. She had told him plainly, and he had agreed immediately, and he stood in the courtyard when she was ready to leave and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Carvin will hear that Davin is alive and well within 2 weeks. I know, she said. He will look for the mechanism within a month. I know. The northern reaches do not require you to be findable, he said. As a general principle, she looked at him. The courtyard light was the particular clear light of northern spring, bright and neutral and very honest. He looked the same in it as he had in the gray hall light of the deep nights. No performance, no management, just the specific gravity of him, amber eyes, and the question he was not asking. I will come back when I have done what I need to do, she said. Not before. I know, he said. I am not asking for permission. I am not offering any, he said. I am saying that I will be here, that is different. She held that. Yes, she said finally. It is. She turned her horse and rode south. The Covenant's hall was 8 days south, and she spent all 8 of them with the account of the 7 nights alive in her chest, building and clarifying. She arrived on a Tuesday, in clear weather, and requested the audience she had written ahead to request, and Myron received her in the formal hall, with the full trappings of the head priestess's office, the robes, the formal seating, the 2 junior priestesses stationed at the doors. Myron was 61 years old and had been head of the Covenant for 20 years, and had the face of a woman who had learned to make the long calculations and lived comfortably with the cost to others. She looked at Sarah with the careful expression of someone managing a situation they had anticipated and prepared for. Sarah looked back. You were successful, Myron said. Lord Davin lives. The Covenant is pleased. Yes, Sarah said. Lord Davin lives. The counter-ritual was completed. The curse is exhausted, she paused. You did not tell me what I was doing. You were informed of the essential. No, Sarah said, and her voice was even, the way the curse had been even. Patient, constant, indifferent to how long it took. I was pointed at a task. I was told it was necessary. I was not told that I was the ritual instrument of the counter-curse, or that the counter-ritual required a willing tether, or that the letter you sent the king specifically used the word willingly in describing the conditions. I was not told that the Covenant was choosing a side in the Reach's politics and using my body to do it. Myron's expression did not change. That was information too. The work required discretion, Myron said. If the Elder Carvin had known a counter-ritual was being initiated, you could have told me, Sarah said, and asked me to maintain discretion. You chose not to. You chose to use my healer's instinct as a lever instead. You knew that if you pointed me at a dying man, I would not ask enough questions until it was too late to matter. She held Myron's eyes. That is not discretion. That is using someone's best quality against them. Silence in the formal hall. The junior priestesses at the doors were very still. I will not serve under your administration again, Sarah said. This is not a negotiation. I have given you the formal notice your own charter requires, in writing, which I sent ahead. You will find it in your correspondence. I do not require your acceptance or your understanding. Myron looked at her for a long moment. You are choosing the king's court, she said. Carvin will come for you. I know, Sarah said. I am not hiding. She turned and walked out of the Covenant's formal hall into the clear spring light, and the doors closed behind her, and she stood in the courtyard for a moment with the whole of it completed. The thing she had needed to say, said exactly, to the person who needed to hear it, in the exact tone it required, without apology or softening or any of the elaborate emotional management that institutions use to make people doubt the truth of what had been done to them. It was not relief, quite. It was something more specific than relief. It was the particular sensation of a person who has been kneeling on cold stone for 7 nights, standing up entirely, and finding that their legs work, after all. She rode north. The journey took 9 days instead of 8, because she stopped at the coastal settlement, where her mother still kept her herb garden, and spent a night there. And her mother made broth and listened to the whole story without interrupting, except to ask one practical question about the nature of severance curses, which was the right question, and which told Sarah exactly where she had gotten her instinct for asking the right questions. This king, her mother said near the end. Calder, Sarah said. He sat on the floor for 7 nights. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Go then, she said. But go as yourself, not as an instrument. I know the difference now, Sarah said. I know you do, her mother said. I'm saying it anyway. The northern reaches came into view on the 9th day, the great gray-green spread of them under an overcast sky that lit everything from below, the particular flat northern light that showed you exactly what was there without opinion. The hall sat on its hill the way it always had, spare and load-bearing and without vanity. She could see the courtyard from the last rise. She could see him in it, standing with Davin, who was upright and solid and looked like himself, the full, specific, entirely present version of a man who had spent 9 days in a room on a cold floor with a healer's hands at his throat and come back with everything intact. Calder saw her before she reached the courtyard. She knew this because he stopped speaking in the middle of whatever he had been saying to Davin and turned toward the rise. And even from the distance she could see the quality of that turn. Not performance, not management, just a man orienting toward something he had been waiting for, in the honest and specific way of a person who had decided to wait and was not regretful about the decision. She rode into the courtyard and dismounted. Davin looked at her, and then at Calder, and had the expression of a man who was going to find something very pressing to attend to elsewhere. He said, "Healer," with a weight that contained about 30 words of genuine meaning, and then he walked away, and she watched him go and found that she liked him unreservedly. Calder said nothing. He crossed the courtyard in the long, even pressure way that cost nothing and revealed everything, and stopped 2 feet in front of her. She looked up at him. "Myron," he said. Told her exactly what she did and walked out, Sarah said. Her expression did not change. She expected it. I think she expected it to matter less than it did, but she expected it. And now I am here, she said. On my schedule and my terms, which I told you I would be. He reached for her then, not grabbing, not claiming, just his hand moving through the 2 feet of space between them and stopping when it found her face, his thumb at her jaw, the kind of touch that asked a question and waited for the answer. She leaned into it. The position, she said, for a healer of sufficient capability. Still open, he said. I have conditions, she said. I expected nothing less, he said. Above them the overcast sky was beginning to break at its western edge, thin gold pressing through where the clouds had decided to separate, and the northern light shifted all at once into something warmer and less neutral, the kind of light that did not tell you what was there without opinion, but rather told you what it thought about it, which was not always appropriate, but was, in this case, entirely welcome. She was 29 years old, and she had held a wolf all night with bare hands, and walked into the Covenant's formal hall, and said the true words clearly and ridden 9 days north on her own terms, and she was not an instrument, and she was not a mechanism, and she was not the willingness that someone else had engineered. She was Sarah Voss, healer of the northern reaches, and she had chosen this place and this man, with both hands open.